At my brother's wedding, I was humiliated in front of everyone. My reaction shocked the entire family. I never imagined that my brother's wedding day would be the day I would finally free myself from everything that held me back. I woke up early, with that weight on my chest that had been with me for years. The feeling of being out of place, even within my own family, seemed to stick to me like wet clothing. Since I was little, I'd learned to be the discreet one, the one who doesn't bother, the one who doesn't draw attention. And that day, once again, that was what was expected of me. Mom called me early to remind me to wear a neutral dress, nothing flashy, because it's not your day, daughter, it's your brother's. I swallowed hard and said, "Okay, Mom." But inside, something began to crack. I was tired of hiding myself so as not to hurt anyone's ego. When I looked in the mirror, wearing the dress I'd chosen, simple, but revealing the woman I'd become, I felt fear and pride at the same time. Fear of what people would say, but pride in finally seeing myself. I'd spent years feeling invisible, and now that I saw myself, I no longer wanted to disappear. I applied my light makeup, styled my hair the way I liked it, and left the house in silence. In the car, my heart was pounding. I knew there would be stares, comments, maybe even embarrassment, but I needed to allow myself to exist that way. Not out of vanity, but out of dignity. I no longer owed anyone anything. I arrived at the wedding hall, and the first person to see me was Daniela, my brother's wife. Her smile was one of those fake ones that you can feel even in your stomach. She hugged me, but it was a quick hug, her eyes scanning me up and down. "Wow, Isabella, you look different," she said, trying to hide her discomfort. I just smiled and replied, "Yes, I do." For the first time, I didn't shrink to fit in. I felt the stares coming from my mother, my father, even my brother, who seemed unsure whether to praise me or apologize for existing alongside the woman who criticized me the most. It was then that I realized no one was prepared to truly deal with me. I tried to distract myself, chat with the guests, but the atmosphere was suffocating. I could feel people whispering, that feeling of being the talk of the town without having done anything wrong. My mother came to me with that usual sweet, venomous tone. "Daughter, you look beautiful, but you could have worn a more discreet dress, right?" Danny looked a little uncomfortable. The urge to scream was overwhelming, but I took a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't apologize. I just looked at her and said, "Mom." It was her who felt uncomfortable, not me. She looked at me, startled, as if I'd spoken heresy. I felt my legs tremble, but also a strength I'd never felt before. It was as if I were giving myself back the space that had always been taken from me. The party wore on, and I could feel the mood between Felipe and Daniela slowly sour. She wouldn't take her eyes off me, as if my presence were an affront. Every time someone complimented my appearance or asked about the surgery I'd had, her expression changed. At one point, she came up to me, a glass in her hand and a cynical smile. "You made a point of showing up, didn't you, Isa?" I could have backed away, as I always did, but I didn't. I looked at her without anger and replied, "No, I made a point of looking good. There's a difference." The silence that formed around me was heavy, but liberating. For the first time, I felt like she was on my side, and that alone was worth more than any approval. After that moment with Daniela, everything inside me seemed to spin. I felt ashamed for a few seconds, not for having responded, but for having spent so much of my life keeping quiet. How many times have I swallowed worse things just to keep the peace? How many times have I stopped wearing clothes, cutting my hair the way I wanted, speaking my mind just to avoid upsetting others? I've always been the good daughter, the one who understands, the one who gives in. And all I got from that was being forgotten, erased, treated like someone who had to ask permission to exist. The penny dropped there, in the middle of the party, with loud music and smiling people. Sometimes life's pain doesn't scream. It whispers in your ear and makes you see everything at once. I sat for a moment at the corner table, my heart racing, trying to understand what I was feeling. My father came over to me with that fix everything quickly way of his. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Daughter, don't provoke, okay? Daniela is sensitive. Don't ruin your brother's day." At that moment, my blood boiled. Everything inside me told me it wasn't fair. I looked at him and replied without raising my voice, "Dad, I didn't ruin anything. I just exist." He stared at me, somewhat blankly, and I realized how much he didn't know me. It was strange to see my Own father treating me like a nuisance when all I wanted was respect. That's when I realized my pain was never their problem. It was their discomfort in dealing with me as an equal. The night went on, and every word I heard seemed to confirm how much that environment was no longer mine. People laughed, danced, took pictures, and I felt like I was on another planet. I didn't want to fight, I didn't want to cause trouble, but I also didn't want to be annihilated. So I did something simple. But for me, it was huge. I got up, walked to the door of the room, and left. No drama, no scene. I just left. The street air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, as if it were the first time in a long time I'd truly breathed. I grabbed my phone, ordered a ride, and sat on the curb, looking up at the sky. I remember thinking, I don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. And that felt like a beginning, not an end. On the way home, I cried. I cried everything I hadn't cried in years. It wasn't sadness, it was relief. It hurt, but it was a cleansing pain. I thought about everything I'd endured, the comments, the comparisons, the pressures. I thought about how many times I'd been told I should be softer, nicer, less intense. And I realized how much I'd lost myself trying to be what they expected. There, in that car, I made a promise to myself. I would never again diminish myself to fit into others' comfort zones. If I'm going to be loved, let it be for who I am, not for what they've invented of me. And for the first time, I felt proud of the woman I was becoming. When I got home, I took off my shoes and looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was a little smudged, my eyes puffy, but there was something different in my gaze. I saw myself and recognized myself, not as the faded daughter, the invisible sister, the one who lives in the shadows. I was me, whole, wounded, but strong, and I didn't need applause to feel it. That night, alone in my room, I wrote in my phone's notepad, "Today I chose myself." And that simple act was more powerful than any approval I'd sought my entire life. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wouldn't go back. And that alone was a victory. The next day I woke up to my phone flooded with messages. From my mom, my dad, even Felipe. None of them asked if I was okay. They just wanted to know why I'd left the party without warning and left a bad atmosphere. It was like being punched. They were more concerned with appearances than with how I felt. For a moment I considered explaining myself, but I gave up. I always tried to explain, justify, fix things. Only this time I knew it was no use. They didn't want to understand. They wanted to control me. I deleted all the messages and put my phone away. I remained silent all day, feeling that mix of pain and freedom. It was strange not trying to defend myself, but it was a new kind of peace, half hard, half sweet. The other day, Felipe showed up at my door. I thought he was coming to talk, to try to understand what happened, but no. He came to ask me to apologize to Danny to put an end to the matter. He said she had been crying, that she was feeling humiliated because of me. I listened quietly, looking at him, and when he finished, I asked, "What about you, Felipe? Do you think I did something wrong?" He looked away. He didn't answer, and his silence was the clearest answer I could have gotten. I realized that the favoritism, the imbalance, wasn't in my head. It was real, and he just didn't want to see it. When he left, I closed the door and cried again, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. It was from exhaustion, tired of being the scapegoat for a broken family system. The following days were silent. No one in my family reached out to see how I was truly doing. Only Aunt Clara sent me a message. "Proud of you." It was time to let go. I read it and cried again, but this time it was different. I felt seen. That simple message was the first genuine gesture of support I'd received in a long time. She'd always tried to warn me about how things worked, but I didn't have the strength to resist. Now I understood what she meant. Sometimes, family love comes with a heavy burden of control, and we only realize it when we decide to walk away. It's not easy. It hurts terribly, but it's the only way to breathe. I started doing little things for myself. I went for walks without telling anyone. I started reading again, taking care of myself, leaving the house without fear of what people would think. I still felt the emptiness of rejection, but at the same time, there was a new sensation, a lightness, an inner space that hadn't existed before. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders that I'd always carried. I realized that freedom hurts at first, because with it comes silence, loneliness, doubt. But it also brings a kind of strength that grows quietly, changing us from the inside out. I began to enjoy this solitude that left me at peace. A week later, I got a call from Fred, my brother's best friend. He'd always been more observant, more honest. He said, "Issa, Danny's freaking out. She thought you were trying to compete with her, but everyone could tell the problem wasn't you." I remained silent. He continued, "You know, I think she's always been envious of what's most simple about you. That authenticity that doesn't have to force anything." I thanked him, but deep down, it hurt. Because it was unfair. I never wanted to compete with anyone. I just wanted to be myself. But for the first time, someone outside the family saw what I'd been through. And that made me even more certain that I wasn't crazy. I was just waking up from a cycle that was never mine. Over time, my family's silence became routine. No calls, no messages. At first it hurt. I'd find myself checking my phone, waiting for some signal, some attempt to reach out. But the days passed, and I began to understand that emptiness was, in fact, space. Space for me. To breathe, think, rebuild. I began to look at my story with new eyes. They always told me I was cold, difficult, closed off. But the truth is, I only learned to protect myself. The coldness they saw was just a reflection of the lack of acceptance I felt. And now, without that constant emotional burden, I could finally hear myself. It was strange, but good. Aunt Clara started visiting me more often. She didn't come with advice or judgment, just presence. Sometimes we'd have coffee in silence, and that was enough. She said I reminded her a lot of my grandmother, a woman who also refused to be silent to please anyone. I liked hearing that. It gave me a sense of continuity, of not being alone in this struggle to be who I am. In these conversations, I realized how much the women in my family were taught to fit in, and how much this destroyed the individuality of all of us. I promised myself that this cycle would end with me, that if I ever had a daughter, she would grow up knowing she could be whole without guilt. Daniela, on the other hand, continued to try to maintain her perfect image. I saw some photos on social media, she and Felipe smiling, posting phrases about a blessed couple, but I could see in her eyes that something had broken. I didn't feel revenge, nor pleasure in seeing it. I felt sadness, because I knew that the control she tried to exert over me was, in fact, fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. And Felipe? He remained trapped in this role of pleasing everyone, including her. I stopped expecting him to change. Sometimes loving a sibling also means accepting that they won't understand you. One day, after months, my mom texted me. She said that things were calming down and that Danny wanted to make amends. I read it and stared at the screen. Once, I would have said yes, just to please her. But now I knew what that invitation really meant. To go back to the same place as before, to shut up and pretend nothing happened. So I calmly replied, "Mom, I don't have anything against anyone, but I won't apologize for being who I am." She saw it and never responded, and I felt at peace, because for the first time I didn't need her approval to feel good. My validation came from within. Things began to shift inside me, quietly. I realized that strength doesn't come from shouting to the world who you are, but from standing firm when they try to erase you. I stopped blaming myself for walking away. I stopped trying to understand what I could have done differently. Because deep down, I did what was necessary to survive emotionally. Sometimes the love of family hurts more than its absence, and I needed to lose the we to find the me again. Today, I see that wedding day wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of my real life. Today, when I think about that wedding day, I don't feel anger. I feel a kind of gratitude that's hard to explain. It was a tense, heavy day, full of stares and judgments. But it was there that I understood who I truly was. Sometimes life puts you at a critical moment before you finally choose yourself. I needed to be humiliated, criticized, and left aside to understand my worth. Not because they recognized me, but because I got tired of begging for recognition. I look back and see a woman who was constantly dimming her own shine so as not to bother others. And today, I no longer ask for permission to exist. After everything, I sought therapy. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Talking about what I'd experienced, understanding where my pain came from, made me realize that I'd spent years carrying responsibilities that were never mine. I wasn't the difficult daughter or the jealous sister. I was just the one who saw what no one else wanted to see. Therapy helped me put a name to things. I learned that love without respect isn't love, it's control. And that being strong doesn't mean silently enduring everything. Sometimes being strong means saying enough and walking away, even if you're shaking inside. Today, my family and I barely speak. At first, it hurt, but now I understand that distance is also a form of love. Love for myself. I've learned to enjoy my own company, to make plans that depend solely on me. I started a new course, changed my look again, traveled alone for the first time. Little things that, for me, mean freedom. I still have days when the pain returns, because family is a bond that never truly disappears. But now, when it tightens, I know how to handle it. I breathe, remember who I am, and move on, without guilt. Sometimes I get messages from people saying they miss the old Isa. I smile, because I know what they miss is the version that kept quiet to fit into other people's molds, that Isa no longer exists. The new one is quieter, but firm, less concerned with pleasing, more concerned with being true. I've learned that we don't need to explain ourselves to those who've never tried to understand, and that there's nothing wrong with choosing yourself. On the contrary, it's the beginning of everything. Loneliness, when it comes after courage, isn't punishment. It's rest. If anyone reads this and is going through something similar, I just want to say one thing. Don't wait for the world to validate you before you start seeing yourself. Sometimes the most painful day of your life is the one that will set you free. Mine was my brother's wedding. And ironically, it was there that I married myself. My truth, my story, my peace. My name is Isabella. I'm 27 years old. And after a long time, I can say with certainty, I'm okay. Not perfect, not complete, but at peace. And that, for me, is the greatest kind of victory there is.